The girl was barefoot. Not the carefree kind of barefoot children usually are, laughing, chasing butterflies, careless about thorns. No, she was bleeding. A thin red line trailed down her shin, bright against pale skin, drying in uneven streaks. Dust clung to it, so did stubbornness. She stood 10 feet from the fence, clutching a bundle of crushed wild herbs to her chest like something precious, like something that could break. Her copper hair hung loose and tangled. Her dress was too thin for the mountain wind, but her eyes were older than the hills behind her. "You're the man who lives alone," she said, not a question, a statement. Sila's walker hadn't spoken to another soul in 11 days. He kept count. Silence was predictable. Silence didn't ask about the night. Lantern light flickered over his brother's still face. Silence didn't dig. "My mama fell," the girl continued. Her voice trembled once, then steadied. "She can't stand up. There's nobody else." The wind hissed through the grass. "Please," she whispered, "she's all I got." Silas's hands froze on the fence wire. He studied her, dirt beneath her nails, scratches along both arms. Feet raw from stones, she had run far. "Where?" he asked. Relief flashed across her face so fast it almost hurt to see. "Past the creek bend, near the old cedar hollow. 20 minutes if you walk fast." She hesitated. "I ran it in 10. How old are you?" "7, almost 8. She tilted her head, studying him like he was the one on trial. "You look sad." He blinked. "My mama says sad men either turn mean," she swallowed, "or they turn kind." A pause. "Which one are you?" He almost laughed. It came out rough instead. "Haven't decided." "Decide quick," she said softly. "We're running out of time." Something in that sentence cracked open inside him. He dropped the pliers. "Show me." She didn't wait. She turned and slipped through the fence like she'd done it before. He followed. Branches scraped his coat. Stones shifted under his boots. She moved light and certain, ducking limbs he didn't see coming. She never looked back. She trusted he was there. That trust weighed heavy. "What's your name?" he called. "Clara." "Mama calls me Claire." They descended into a narrow hollow tucked between ridges. Smoke lingered in the air, sage, wet bark, and something else, fear. The cabin appeared suddenly, small, tucked into the hillside like it was hiding. And beside the porch steps, a woman lay twisted in the dirt. Her leg bent wrong, dark auburn hair spilled from a loosened braid. Her jaw was clenched so tight the muscles stood out sharp against her skin. A hatchet rested within reach of her hand, even hurt, even vulnerable, ready. Her eyes snapped to him the moment he stepped forward, cold, measuring. "Claire," she breathed through gritted teeth. "What did you do?" The girl dropped to her knees. "You couldn't stand, Mama. I wasn't going to watch you die." Silas stopped at the edge of the clearing, hands visible. "Ma'am, I'm not here to cause trouble." The woman's gaze sharpened. She studied him like a threat she might have to eliminate. "I know who you are," she said, his brow furrowed. "You do. You wake before dawn, your chimney smoke thins by midnight. I've seen it for 3 years." The words hung heavy. "I've been living on your land," she added quietly. 3 years. The world shifted. 3 years, a woman and a child on his land, hidden, and now you know," she finished. "Do what you're going to do. Just let me set my leg first." Claire's fingers gripped his sleeve. "Please don't make us leave, not today." Silas looked at the bent leg, at the hatchet, at the child trying so hard not to cry. Something inside him, something long buried under silence and regret, stirred. "Nobody's leaving," he said. The woman's grip tightened on the hatchet. "Men don't help without wanting something. Maybe I'm tired of wanting nothing." Silence stretched between them. Wind brushed the trees overhead. Her breathing faltered as pain rippled through her. "Help me inside," she said finally. Not surrender, not trust, a decision. He stepped forward carefully. In the moment he did, none of them realized that this small act, this simple choice to help, would pull them straight into a storm neither of them had outrun. Because kindness, in a town like Briar Hollow, never goes unnoticed. He moved slowly, not because he was afraid of her, because she was afraid of him. Silas stopped a few feet away and crouched, keeping his hands where she could see them. Up close, he could see the pain carved across her face. Sweat beaded along her hairline, her lips were pale from clenching them too hard. "That leg's not sitting right," he said quietly. "I'm aware," she replied through her teeth. Claire hovered near her mother's shoulder, small hands fluttering uselessly. "Mama, please let him help." The woman's eyes never left Sila's, sharp gray, defensive, exhausted. "What's your name?" he asked, a pause. "Margaret Hale." "Margaret," he repeated carefully. "I'm going to lift you." It's going to hurt. I know what pain feels like. Something about the way she said it made his chest tighten. He slid one arm beneath her shoulders and another under her knees. She was lighter than she should have been, bones and willpower. When he lifted her, her breath tore from her throat, a strangled sound she fought to swallow. Claire flinched. Mama, Margaret's fingers dug into Silas's coat, gripping hard enough to bruise, but she didn't scream, didn't cry, she endured. Inside, the cabin was neat, too neat, every jar aligned, every surface wiped. Shelves lined with bundles of drying herbs and carefully labeled glass containers, a hiding place, a controlled world. He laid her on the narrow bed behind a thin curtain divider. You need a doctor, he said. No doctors, no town. That leg could, no town, she repeated, fiercer this time. Nobody knows we're here. It stays that way. She reached for a jar on the shelf above her bed. Her hands were steady despite the tremor in her breathing. Claire, blue jar and the willow bark. Claire moved quickly, bringing them over like she'd done this before. You can't set that yourself, Silas said. Margaret's gaze flicked to him. Watch me, he exhaled slowly. I've set broken legs on cattle, horses, I can help. I am not livestock. A flicker, almost humor, passed through Claire's face despite the tension. Silas tilted his head slightly. Livestock usually cooperate. For a split second, Margaret's mouth twitched. Then the pain hit again and the humor vanished. Silence filled the cabin except for the fire crackling softly in the stove. Fine, she said at last, you do it, but if you make it worse, you'll use the hatchet, I gathered. Claire blinked between them. Please don't threaten the only help we've got. Silas moved closer. He examined the swollen ankle, already turning deep purple. Dislocated, Margaret muttered, slipped on the wet step. He positioned his hands carefully. On three, don't count, she snapped, just do it. He did. The sound was soft but sickening. A sharp shift. Margaret's body went rigid, her fingers clamped around the edge of the mattress. A broken sound escaped her throat, not quite a scream, not quite silence. Claire turned away, shoulders shaking, no sobbing, no noise. Silent tears. Silas felt something twist deep inside him at that. Done, he said softly, it's back. Margaret sagged against the pillow, breathing ragged, sweat dampened her temples. For a long moment, none of them spoke, then she looked at him. You've got steady hands, she said quietly. He shrugged. Didn't always. Her eyes searched his face like she was trying to read a story he hadn't told. Claire wiped her cheeks and forced a smile. Mama's the best healer in 3 counties, even if nobody knows it. Margaret reached for her daughter's hand, squeezed it. Silas wrapped the ankle with the cloth and herbs she handed him, efficient. Careful, you've been here 3 years, he asked gently. Yes. Why hide? Her jaw tightened. Because some places don't forgive, she said flatly, even when there's nothing to forgive. Silence thickened. Outside, the wind shifted direction. Silas stood slowly. You'll need firewood, water. That ankle won't hold weight for a week. I'll manage. You can barely stand. I've handled worse. He studied her, pride wrapped around fear like armor. Claire looked up at him with wide, hopeful eyes. Will you come back tomorrow? Margaret stiffened. Silas hesitated. He hadn't planned on coming back, hadn't planned on any of this. But the image of Claire running barefoot through the forest burned behind his eyes. I'll come at dawn, he said. Margaret's breath hitched almost invisibly. We don't need charity. Good, he replied. I don't offer it. A pause. Then what are you offering? She asked quietly. Silas looked at the small, controlled cabin, at the child who cried without sound, at the woman who bled without complaint. Company, he said, the word hung there, heavy, dangerous. And something about it made Margaret look more afraid than she had when he first stepped into the clearing. Because company meant attachment, and attachment was always the beginning of something neither of them could afford. Dawn came cold. Silas arrived before the sun did. He brought salt. He brought sugar. He brought a sack of flour he had no intention of explaining. Claire spotted him first, stepping out from behind the cabin with a water bucket nearly too heavy for her arms. Her whole face changed when she saw him. You came, she breathed. I said I would. I told Mama you would. She lowered her voice conspiratorially. She said maybe. He took the bucket from her hands without asking. How's her leg? Purple, angry, she tried to stand before sunrise. Claire rolled her eyes dramatically. She's stubborn. Reckon I noticed. They reached the porch together. Margaret sat upright in a chair, ankle propped on a wooden crate. Her hair was braided tight, clean apron tied around her waist. The hatchet rested within reach, prepared, always prepared. You're early, she said evenly. You said dawn. She glanced at the sack in his arms. Her expression flickered when she realized what it was. I asked for salt. You did. I did not ask for the rest. Didn't seem right bringing salt to an empty pantry. Silence stretched. Claire hovered like a hummingbird, eyes wide. Mama, Margaret's fingers pressed lightly into the flour sack, just for a second, like she needed to confirm it was real. It costs money, she said quietly. I have money. Money earned on land we're occupying. Money earned fixing fences and feeding cattle that don't know you exist. Their eyes locked. Claire clapped once, breaking the tension. Biscuits. Margaret shot her a warning look. Claire shrugged. It's been months. Something softened in Margaret's face, just barely. Get the bowl, she said. Claire disappeared inside like a streak of lightning. Silas spent the morning working without being asked. He filled the wood box, hauled water, repaired a loose shutter, moved quietly, careful not to invade more space than necessary. Margaret watched from the porch, measuring, calculating. Waiting for the cost. The cabin filled with the smell of biscuits and strong coffee. When she finally handed him one, warm and golden, he took a bite and had to blink hard. He hadn't tasted something made with care in years. These are, he cleared his throat, good. They're flour and lard, she said. Not magic, feels like magic. Claire grinned proudly, crumbs on her chin. They sat on the porch steps, 3 cups of coffee steaming in the morning air. You built a life here, Silas said. Margaret shook her head. I built a hiding place. Looks like living to me. Her jaw tightened slightly. Hiding can look like living from far away. A breeze stirred the herb bundles hanging along the porch beam. You never answered, he continued gently. Why hide? Claire stilled. Margaret stared into her cup for a long moment. Because when my husband died, she said finally, voice flat and controlled, the town decided I helped him. Silas didn't interrupt. Accidents are inconvenient, she went on. Blame is easier. Did you? He asked quietly. Her head snapped up. Her eyes were fire. No, he nodded once. I believe you, she blinked. You don't know me. I know what a liar looks like. Claire leaned against her mother's side. They called her things, she said softly. They threw rocks at our windows. Claire, Margaret warned. It's true, the girl insisted. You bled and didn't cry. Margaret's fingers tightened around her coffee cup. Silas felt something shift in his chest, a slow, dangerous heat. And the sheriff, he asked, chose silence, Margaret replied. Silence protects the majority. Silas let out a breath that wasn't quite a laugh. Silence protects cowards, her gaze flickered. For a moment, something passed between them, recognition, shared understanding. Claire tilted her head thoughtfully. You don't feel empty like you did yesterday, Silas froze. I didn't feel empty. You did, she insisted gently. You just didn't know it. Margaret looked at him then, really looked at him. Why are you helping us? She asked. He stared out at the trees. I was alone a long time, he said. Didn't think that bothered me. And now, he glanced at Claire, humming as she flipped through a book she'd read a dozen times. And now the quiet feels different. Margaret's breath caught. Different meant dangerous. Different meant attachment. You shouldn't get used to us, she said softly. Too late. The words slipped out before he could stop them. Her eyes widened slightly, because if he was already too late, then so was she. It happened on the 12th morning. Silas had just finished mending the fence along the lower ridge when he saw dust rising on the road. 2 horses, no 3. His stomach tightened. Visitors were rare. Visitors together were trouble. By the time the riders reached his yard, he already knew one of them. Deputy Harold Pike, quiet face, narrow eyes, a badge that shone brighter than his courage. Behind him rode Martin Crowell from the feed store, a man who treated gossip like currency. And the third, Mayor Thomas Prescott. Silas hadn't expected that. Prescott didn't leave town unless something needed controlling. Silas stepped out of the barn and wiped his hands on his coat. Morning, he said evenly. Deputy Pike tipped his hat without warmth. Walker. Prescott's eyes scanned the ranch house, the barn, the yard, calculating. Mind if we talk? You're already here, Crowell smirked. Pike cleared his throat. We've noticed you riding east every morning before sunup, coming back late. Silas shrugged. It's my land. East leads to forest, Crowell added casually. Deep forest. And folks don't ride daily into deep forest without reason. Silence stretched. Prescott leaned forward in his saddle. There've been rumors, he said smoothly. Tracks, smoke where there shouldn't be smoke. Silas kept his expression neutral. Animals make tracks, storms make smoke. Pike's hand rested near his holster, not threatening, just reminding. If there's squatters on your land, Pike said, we'd like to know. The word squatters felt deliberate. Silas folded his arms slowly. If there were, that'd be my business. Crowell laughed softly. You protecting someone, Walker? The air shifted. Dangerous, Prescott's gaze sharpened. You've always been a reasonable man. Hate to see that change. Silas held his stare. Hate to see you trespassing, he replied calmly. A muscle jumped in Pike's jaw. We can come back with papers, the deputy said. You're welcome to. A long pause. Prescott finally straightened in his saddle, just checking in. They turned their horses, slow and deliberate, but before leaving the gate, Pike looked back. If there's something out there that concerns the town, he said quietly, we'll find it. Then they rode away. Silas stood still long after the dust settled. His pulse pounded in his ears. They were suspicious. Suspicion in Briar Hollow wasn't harmless. It was a match near dry grass. He didn't hesitate. He saddled his horse and rode east, fast. When he reached the hollow, Margaret was on the porch, sorting herbs. Claire sat nearby, reading aloud softly to herself. Margaret saw his face and froze. What happened? Pike, Prescott, Crowell. The color drained from her face. They know, she whispered. They suspect. That's enough. Claire stood slowly. Are we leaving again? The question was too calm for a child. Silas's chest tightened. No, he said firmly, not running. Margaret's hands trembled, though her voice stayed steady. You don't understand how it works. Suspicion grows. It feeds, they don't need proof. I know you don't. She stood carefully, favoring her healing ankle. They'll search, they'll question, and when they find us, they won't. She stared at him. You can't stop them. Maybe not. Silence thickened between them. Claire watched both adults with sharp, measuring eyes. Margaret's voice dropped. If they drag me back to town, they'll drag my daughter with me. Silas felt the heat rise in his chest again. Then we don't let that happen. How? She demanded. The word cracked through the clearing. How? The question neither of them had an answer for. Claire stepped forward suddenly. We could live at your house. Both adults turned to her. Margaret shook her head immediately. No, Silas didn't answer right away. The idea had already crossed his mind. They'd see us, Margaret continued. They'd know. They already suspect, he replied quietly. Claire looked between them. Mama, I'm tired of hiding. The words landed heavy. Margaret closed her eyes briefly. Silas stepped closer. If they're going to look, he said slowly, let them look at something strong, not something afraid. Margaret's eyes opened. Fear battled with something else, hope, and hope was more dangerous than fear. You'd risk your name, she asked softly. I ain't got much left of it. Silence, wind moving through trees. Claire's small voice broke through. I don't want to run again. Margaret's composure cracked just a little. She pulled her daughter close. Silas watched them and realized something terrifying. He wasn't just helping anymore, he was choosing. And once he chose, there would be no going back. That night the hollow felt smaller. The trees pressed closer. Every snapping twig sounded like a warning. Margaret sat at the small wooden table, mending a tear in Claire's sleeve with tight, controlled stitches. The lamplight cast long shadows against the walls. Silas stood near the door, hat in his hands, not sure whether to stay or leave. Claire pretended to read. She hadn't turned the page in 10 minutes. They'll come with papers next time, Margaret said quietly. Yes, they won't knock politely. No, silence. The fire cracked in the stove. Claire's voice came soft but steady. Mama, I don't want to sleep with my shoes on anymore. Margaret's needle paused midair. For 3 years, Claire had slept ready to run, shoes beside the bed, a small bundle packed, always prepared. Silas felt something inside him twist hard. You won't have to, he said before thinking. Margaret looked up sharply. Don't promise what you can't guarantee. I can guarantee my house. Her breath caught almost invisibly. Your house is visible, she replied. Your name is known. If we show up there, they'll question you. They're questioning me now. That's different. How? Because now you can deny knowing us. Silas met her eyes. I won't. The words hung between them, heavy. Margaret's jaw tightened. You barely know me. I know enough. Enough for what? He exhaled slowly. For this. The word landed like thunder. Claire looked up immediately. Margaret stared at him. What are you saying? Silas stepped forward. I'm saying if you and Claire move to my ranch, you won't be hiding in a hollow anymore. You'll be under a roof with doors that lock and walls that don't whisper every time the wind changes. And when they ask who I am, she challenged. My wife, the silence that followed felt endless. Claire blinked. Margaret didn't breathe. You can't be serious, she whispered. I am. This isn't a storybook solution. No, you don't marry someone for protection. People marry for worse reasons. Her laugh was sharp. Fragile marriage is permanent. So is what they'll do if they drag you back. She stood abruptly, pacing despite the lingering limp. You don't understand what you're offering. I do. No, you don't, she snapped, emotion finally breaking through. I already lost one husband. I already buried a life once. I can't build another on desperation. Silas moved closer but didn't touch her. This isn't desperation, he said quietly. It's strategy. And what do you get out of it? The question hung sharp and direct. He swallowed. I get to stop coming back to an empty house. Margaret stilled. Claire's eyes softened. I get mornings that don't echo, he continued. I get coffee on a porch that isn't silent. I get to matter to someone again. Margaret's composure wavered. You barely know us, she repeated, weaker now. I know your daughter ran barefoot through the forest because she believed I'd help. That's enough. Claire slid off her chair and stepped between them. Can I call you Papa? She asked softly. The word hit him like a hammer to the chest. Margaret's breath broke. Claire, she warned gently, but the child wasn't looking at her mother. She was looking at him, hopeful, terrified, waiting. Silas knelt slowly until he was eye level with her. If you want to, he said. Claire smiled, a real one this time, bright and unguarded. Margaret turned away quickly, pressing her hand to her mouth. Silas rose carefully. You don't have to love me, he said to Margaret. Not now, not ever if you don't want to. But I'll stand between you and them, legally, publicly. And if they destroy your name, she asked. He gave a small, almost tired smile. Reckon it's been sitting unused long enough. Claire slipped her hand into his. Margaret watched it happen, watched her daughter choose safety, choose him. Her shoulders trembled once, then she straightened. If we do this, she said slowly, we do it in town, in daylight. No hiding, agreed. And when it's over, when the danger passes, I decide what this marriage becomes. Silas nodded without hesitation. Your pace. She searched his face for doubt, found none. Claire squeezed both their hands together. Then let's stop running, she whispered. Margaret closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, something had changed. Fear was still there, but so was resolve. Tomorrow, she said quietly. And the hollow, for the first time in 3 years, didn't feel like their only option anymore. They left before sunrise, not because they were hiding, because they were done hiding. Margaret packed only what mattered, a trunk with clothing, her jars of medicine wrapped in cloth, Samuel's old photograph tucked into the lining of her sewing kit. Claire carried her books in her arms like treasure. Silas loaded the wagon without speaking. The hollow stood still behind them, 3 years of survival, 3 years of silence. Margaret did not look back. If she did, she might not leave. Claire climbed onto the wagon seat between them. Her small hands reached automatically, one to her mother, one to Silas. Neither pulled away. The road to Briar Hollow Town stretched long and exposed, 8 miles of open air and no cover. Margaret's breathing changed the closer they got. Faster, shallower, Silas noticed but said nothing. When the first rooftops appeared, Claire straightened her shoulders. Head up, Mama, she whispered. Margaret lifted her chin. The wagon wheels rolled onto Main Street. Conversations stopped. Doors creaked open, faces appeared in windows, whispers spread like spilled ink. That's her. She came back. Walker's gone mad. Virginia Prescott stood on the boardwalk outside the Mercantile, arms folded neatly across her chest. Her expression was not surprise, it was satisfaction. She had expected this. Silas pulled the wagon to a stop outside the territorial office. Margaret's hand tightened in his for just a second, then she released it. I can walk, she said firmly. He stepped down first and offered his hand anyway. After a brief pause, she took it, not because she needed help, because she chose to. They walked together toward the office doors. Claire stayed close at Margaret's side. The crowd thickened, murmurs sharpened. She killed him, poor Samuel, dragging that child into this. Silas felt the heat rising in his chest, but Margaret's grip on his arm stopped him. Not today, she murmured. Inside, Judge Alden Calloway stood waiting, an older man, observant eyes, no nonsense. You understand, he began without ceremony, this will not quiet the town. It isn't meant to, Margaret replied. The judge studied her carefully. Mrs. Hale, accusations remain unresolved. Accusations are not proof, she said evenly. Silas spoke clearly. We're here to marry, not to debate rumors. A murmur stirred outside the door. Right on cue, Virginia Prescott entered, perfect posture, perfect composure. This is a mockery, she said smoothly. A legal shield for a guilty woman. Claire stiffened. Margaret did not turn. Do you have proof? She asked calmly. Virginia smiled faintly. The entire town is not evidence, Silas cut in. The judge raised a hand. Enough. If you have formal charges, Mrs. Prescott, file them. Otherwise, this office is for lawful proceedings. Virginia's eyes hardened. You're attaching yourself to scandal, Mr. Walker, she warned. I'm attaching myself to truth. Silence fell heavy. The judge opened the register. Witnesses, the door creaked again. Pearl Whitmore stepped inside, elderly, trembling slightly, determined. I'll witness, she said. Behind her stood Daniel Porter, the former stable owner. And I will too, Margaret's breath caught. Daniel met her eyes. I told the deputy it was an accident. I signed it. I still have the copy. A ripple moved through the room. Virginia's composure cracked just slightly. Judge Calloway dipped his pen in ink. Very well, the ceremony was brief, formal words, legal vows, but when the judge asked Margaret if she took this man, she looked at Silas fully, not guarded, not defensive. I do, she said. Silas slid the plain gold band onto her finger. Her hand trembled only once. When the judge pronounced them husband and wife, Claire clapped her hands together with unfiltered joy. You may kiss your bride, the judge added. Silas hesitated only a heartbeat, then he leaned in. The kiss was not dramatic, not desperate, but real. Margaret's fingers gripped his coat just slightly. Outside, whispers exploded. Inside, something steadied. For the first time in 4 years, Margaret Hale stood in town not as an accused widow, but as a married woman, protected, claimed, not hidden. And Virginia Prescott's narrowed eyes promised this battle was only beginning. The cheering lasted exactly 3 seconds. That was how long it took for Virginia Prescott to recover. She stepped forward slowly, her boots clicking against the wooden floor, every movement controlled. You may have signed a paper, she said coolly, but that doesn't erase murder. Claire's hand tightened around Margaret's skirt. Silas stepped half a pace forward. Judge Calloway closed the marriage ledger with deliberate calm. Mrs. Prescott, unless you're filing a formal charge, I suggest. Oh, I am, Virginia interrupted smoothly. Not for murder, not yet. The crowd leaned closer. For child endangerment. The words sliced through the room. Margaret's breath faltered. You think marrying a rancher protects you? Virginia continued. That child has lived hidden in the woods for years, deprived of schooling, community stability. Claire looked up, confused. Silas's jaw tightened. She was hiding from your town. Virginia ignored him. I will be filing a petition by sunset, she announced, for immediate review of custody. Margaret's fingers trembled just once, then stilled. You don't care about my daughter, she said evenly. Virginia's smile was thin. I care about the town's children. The town's children, Margaret's voice rose slightly. Or your pride, a murmur rippled. Virginia's eyes sharpened. Careful, Judge Calloway cleared his throat. Petitions require evidence, Mrs. Prescott. And I have statements, Virginia replied calmly, about the late Samuel Hale, about Margaret's temperament. About the night he died. Silas felt heat climb his spine. Daniel Porter stepped forward suddenly. I signed a statement 4 years ago, he said loudly, that the horse was unbroken and never should have been ridden in that storm. All eyes turned. Virginia did not flinch, and yet, she replied, Samuel rode it. Because he insisted, Daniel shot back. Margaret begged him not to. Pearl Whitmore lifted her trembling chin. I saw her carry that child through town barefoot after the funeral, blood on her feet. She wasn't fleeing guilt, she was fleeing cruelty. Gasps. Virginia's composure thinned. You stayed silent then, she said sharply. Pearl nodded, tears pooling, and I regret it every day. Margaret swallowed hard. Claire squeezed her hand. Judge Calloway looked between them all. If this goes to hearing, evidence will be reviewed properly. Not shouted on Main Street. Virginia turned to Silas. You're risking your ranch for a woman you barely know. Silas met her stare. I know enough. You think you're her savior? No, he replied evenly. I'm her husband. The word landed solid, unmovable. Virginia's lips pressed tight. This isn't finished, she said quietly. No, Margaret agreed softly. It isn't. Virginia turned and walked out. The crowd parted for her again, but slower this time, more uncertain. Inside the office, silence lingered. Claire looked up at Silas. Are they going to take me? The question was small, terrified. Silas crouched in front of her. No, he said firmly. Margaret's eyes filled, but she held steady. Judge Calloway spoke carefully. Prepare yourselves, the hearing will happen, but today he paused. Today you are legally a family. Claire smiled faintly. Margaret looked down at the ring on her finger, still unfamiliar, still heavy, but solid. Outside, the whispers continued, some cruel, some curious, and a few supportive. Daniel placed a hand on Silas's shoulder. You're not alone in this, he said quietly. Pearl nodded. Truth has a way of resurfacing. Margaret exhaled slowly. 4 years of running, 4 years of silence, and now 4 days until the custody hearing. Silas reached for her hand again. This time she didn't hesitate because hiding had ended and the fight had only just begun. They returned to the ranch under a sky heavy with gathering clouds. No one spoke for the first mile. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was full of what had just happened, full of what was coming. Claire sat between them, holding the marriage certificate in both hands like it was something sacred. We're really a family now, she whispered, almost afraid to say it too loud. Silas glanced at Margaret. Margaret didn't answer right away, but she didn't correct her either. When the ranch house came into view, Claire gasped softly. She had seen it before from a distance, but now it was hers. Silas helped Margaret down first. This time she let him steady her without protest. Inside, the house felt different. It had always been clean, organized, quiet. Too quiet. Now there were 2 extra footsteps on the floorboards, 2 extra breaths in the air. Claire ran her fingers along the staircase railing, eyes wide. Is this where I sleep? Silas nodded. Upstairs. First room on the left. She darted up the steps, boots thudding, excitement spilling over. Margaret stood still in the center of the kitchen. She looked at the table set for 3. At the small vase of wildflowers Silas had gathered before they left that morning, at the fire already burning warm. You prepared, she said softly. I hoped. Her throat tightened. She moved slowly around the room, touching the back of a chair, the edge of the counter. This is dangerous, she murmured. Silas frowned slightly. How? It feels safe. The words were barely audible. Safe had always been temporary. Safe had always been taken. Claire's footsteps thundered back down the stairs. There's curtains, she exclaimed. Real ones, and the bed is soft. Mama, it doesn't smell like smoke. Margaret blinked rapidly. Silas cleared his throat gently. You hungry? Claire nodded immediately. Margaret hesitated, then moved toward the stove. I'll cook, she said automatically. You don't have to, he replied. I want to. There was comfort in motion, in purpose. She rolled up her sleeves and began preparing supper with steady hands. Silas watched quietly, not intruding, not hovering, just present. Claire set the table carefully, tongue between her teeth in concentration. 3 plates, 3 cups. 3 forks. Margaret paused when she noticed. For a second, emotion threatened to overwhelm her. Silas saw it, so did Claire. Mama, the child asked softly. Margaret inhaled slowly. Then she smiled, a small one but real. They ate together, simple stew, fresh bread, nothing extraordinary, yet every bite felt like something fragile and new. Claire talked nonstop, about curtains, about the window view, about how she might plant flowers near the porch. Silas found himself laughing. Margaret looked at him when he did, truly looked. As if memorizing the sound, after supper Claire grew quiet, sleepy, overwhelmed. Margaret tucked her into bed upstairs. Silas stood alone in the kitchen, listening to the muffled murmur of mother and daughter. Soft words, gentle reassurance, then silence. Footsteps descended slowly. Margaret stopped at the bottom of the stairs. The house was dim now. Firelight flickering against the walls. You understand, she said quietly, this doesn't make it easier. I know, they'll come after her harder now, I know, and if the court rules against us, it won't. You don't know that. He stepped closer. I know I won't stop fighting. Silence stretched between them, not awkward, not distant, charged. You stood between us and them today, she said softly. That's what husbands do. The word lingered, husband, wife, still unfamiliar. Still raw, Margaret's voice dropped. I don't regret saying yes, Silas's breath caught slightly, but I am afraid, he nodded. So am I, she searched his face, and for the first time she reached for his hand first. Because fear shared felt lighter. And upstairs, for the first time in years, Claire slept without her shoes beside the bed. But somewhere beyond the ranch fence, Virginia Prescott was already writing the petition, and morning would not bring peace. Morning arrived too quietly, the kind of quiet that feels like a held breath. Silas was already outside splitting wood when the rider appeared at the edge of the property, a young clerk from town, nervous, avoiding eye contact. Silas wiped his hands and walked forward. Mr. Walker, the boy said, voice cracking slightly, delivery from the territorial office. He held out a folded document, official seal, red wax heavy. Silas didn't need to open it to know. Still, he did. Petition for custody review filed by Virginia Prescott, hearing scheduled in 3 days. He exhaled slowly. Thank you, he said evenly. The boy hesitated. Sir, people are talking. They usually are, the boy swallowed. Some aren't saying bad things. Silas nodded once. The rider left quickly. Inside the house, Margaret stood at the stove, stirring oatmeal. Claire sat at the table, practicing her handwriting on a slate. Silas stepped in quietly. Margaret saw his face. Her shoulders stiffened. It's filed, he said. She didn't ask which it. Claire looked between them. Is that bad? Margaret set the spoon down carefully. It means we go back to town, she said gently, to answer questions. Claire frowned, like a test. Yes, Silas replied. But we're prepared. Margaret took the document from his hand. Her eyes moved steadily over the words, her jaw tightened. She claims I'm unstable, she murmured, dangerous, that I deprived Claire of education. Claire lifted her chin. You taught me to read before I turned 5. Margaret's composure wavered just slightly. Silas stepped closer. She's building a picture, he said quietly, one that suits her. And we build the truth, Margaret replied. Their eyes met. Not panicked, determined, Claire slid off her chair and walked to them. If they ask me, she said firmly, I'll tell them I wasn't scared of Mama, I was scared of them. Margaret's breath hitched. She knelt and pulled her daughter close. You won't be alone in that room, she whispered. Claire nodded fiercely. Silas rested a hand gently on Margaret's shoulder. Daniel Porter is ready to testify, he said. So is Pearl. Margaret looked up sharply. You spoke to them again. I did. Emotion flickered across her face. Gratitude, worry, something softer. You shouldn't carry this alone, he added. I'm not, she said quietly, not anymore. The day passed heavy. Margaret cleaned the house twice. Organized jars that didn't need organizing, checked Claire's lessons 3 times over. Silas repaired fence posts that weren't broken. Every movement carried tension. That evening, as the sun dipped low, a wagon approached. Not Virginia, not the deputy. Daniel Porter climbed down slowly, hat in hand. I heard the petition went through, he said. Silas nodded. Daniel looked at Margaret. I was a coward once, he admitted. I won't be again. Margaret swallowed hard. Thank you, Daniel shifted awkwardly. The horse Samuel rode, I still have the ledger. It shows it was unbroken. The deputy signed off. Silas's eyes sharpened. That matters. It should have mattered 4 years ago, Daniel replied quietly. Claire stepped forward boldly. Will you tell the judge that Mama isn't bad? Daniel crouched slightly to her level. I'll tell him your Mama saved my life more than once. Margaret's composure finally cracked, just a little. She turned away to blink back tears. Silas noticed. After Daniel left, night settled over the ranch. Claire sat between them on the porch steps. Are we going to lose? She asked softly. Silas answered first. No, Margaret looked at him. You sound certain. I am. She studied his face in the fading light. You weren't this certain before us. No, he admitted. Claire leaned against them both. I'm not scared, she said bravely. Margaret kissed the top of her head. I am, she whispered. Silas laced his fingers through Margaret's. So am I, but this time they weren't afraid alone. And in 3 days, the entire town would decide whether fear ruled them or truth did. The courthouse was fuller than it had been in years. Word had spread. People who hadn't spoken Margaret's name in 4 years now whispered it freely. Some with curiosity, some with judgment, some with shame. Silas helped Margaret down from the wagon. Her hand trembled in his, only slightly. Claire stepped down on her own, chin lifted, back straight. Judge Calloway sat at the front bench, expression unreadable. Virginia Prescott stood near the plaintiff's table, perfectly composed. She wore dark blue, severe, controlled. She didn't look at Margaret, not yet. When the proceedings began, the air felt heavy. Virginia stepped forward first. "This petition concerns the welfare of a minor child," she said smoothly. "Clara Hale has lived isolated from society for years, deprived of proper schooling, raised by a woman long accused of violent instability." Margaret didn't flinch. Silas's jaw tightened. Virginia continued. "Furthermore, this sudden marriage raises questions of motive." Murmurs. Judge Calloway tapped his gavel lightly. "Call your first witness." Virginia gestured. Deputy Harold Pike approached the stand. He swore in. "Did you investigate the death of Samuel Hale?" Virginia asked. "Yes, and what did you conclude?" "That circumstances were suspicious." Silas stood abruptly. "Suspicion isn't evidence." Judge Calloway gave him a warning glance but allowed Daniel Porter forward. Daniel carried a worn ledger book. He placed it carefully on the evidence table. "This shows the horse Samuel Hale rode was unbroken," Daniel said firmly. "I told the deputy that." "Signed it." The room stirred. Judge Calloway examined the ledger. Deputy Pike's face paled. Virginia's composure tightened. "You never presented this in court," the judge said to Pike. Pike cleared his throat. "There wasn't a formal inquiry." "Why not?" Silence. "Because it had been easier to blame a widow." Pearl Whitmore approached next. She trembled slightly but spoke clearly. "I saw Margaret Hale leave town barefoot," she said. "With her child in her arms, people were shouting, throwing things." "That wasn't guilt." Margaret's throat tightened. Claire reached for her hand. Virginia shifted tactics. She turned to Margaret directly. "Did you isolate your daughter from the town?" "Yes," Margaret answered steadily. Gasps. Virginia smiled faintly. "So you admit depriving her?" "I removed her from danger," Margaret replied, "from people who had already judged her mother guilty without proof." The room quieted. Judge Calloway leaned forward. "Mrs. Hale, can your daughter read?" Claire stepped forward before being asked. "Yes, sir. Would you show us?" Claire took a book from her satchel. "Read clearly, confidently, every word precise." The silence afterward was louder than any whisper. Virginia's lips pressed thin. Judge Calloway folded his hands. "Does the child show fear of her mother?" Claire looked at Virginia, then at the judge. "No, sir, I was scared of them." The words cut clean. Virginia stiffened. Margaret's composure wavered. Silas reached for her hand. Judge Calloway studied them all for a long moment, then he spoke. "This court finds no evidence of neglect, no evidence of instability, no evidence of wrongdoing in the death of Samuel Hale." A breath swept through the room. Claire clutched Margaret's skirt. "The petition is dismissed," the judge concluded. The gavel struck, sharp, final. Margaret's knees nearly gave. Silas caught her arm. Claire burst into tears, loud, unfiltered, relieved. Margaret knelt and pulled her daughter close. "It's over," she whispered, voice breaking. Silas stood beside them, chest tight. Virginia Prescott remained perfectly still. But her eyes burned. "This town has a short memory," she said quietly before turning to leave. But this time no one parted for her quickly. Some stayed seated, some looked away. Daniel met Margaret's eyes. Pearl nodded through tears. Silas helped Margaret stand, her fingers curled around his. "You didn't run," he murmured. "Neither did you." Claire wiped her cheeks and looked up at them both. "So we stay," Margaret nodded slowly. Yes, they stepped out into the sunlight together, not hiding, not accused, not alone. But as they climbed into the wagon, Silas noticed something across the street. Deputy Pike speaking urgently with Virginia, faces tight. Whispers sharp. The court had dismissed the petition, but pride doesn't dismiss so easily. And sometimes losing in public makes people far more dangerous. For 2 days the ranch felt lighter, not free, but lighter. Claire laughed more. Margaret slept without waking at every sound. Silas found himself humming while repairing a gate and stopped mid-note, startled by his own voice. It felt almost foolish to feel relief, but it crept in anyway until the smoke appeared. Silas noticed it first, late afternoon, rising thin and gray from the direction of the eastern hollow, not from his ranch, from the old cabin. Margaret saw it seconds later. Her face went white. No, she whispered. Claire followed their gaze. That's our cabin. Silas didn't hesitate. He saddled his horse fast. Margaret was already moving toward the wagon. You can't ride alone, she said sharply. I won't. They rode together. Claire left with Daniel Porter, who had come by that afternoon with feed. Daniel's face had tightened when he saw the smoke. Go, he'd said quietly. I'll stay with her. The ride felt longer than it ever had before. Every hoofbeat sounded like accusation. When they reached the hollow, the truth was worse than smoke. The cabin was burning, flames licked through the roof. The garden Margaret had planted was trampled, her herb bundles scattered in the dirt. Silas dismounted before the horse fully stopped. Margaret stood frozen, 3 years of survival going up in orange fire. No, she breathed again. Silas rushed toward the cabin, but it was already lost. Too much flame, too much heat. He grabbed her shoulders gently. It's gone. She shook her head violently. My mother's trunk gone. My journals gone. She pulled away from him, stumbling toward the edge of the clearing. Boot prints scarred the dirt, fresh, deliberate. Silas crouched, studied them. 3 men, heavy steps, not hiding. He rose slowly. This wasn't accident. Margaret's voice turned hollow. I know. She walked toward the edge of the garden, knelt. Picked up a blackened scrap of cloth. Her breathing broke. Silas moved closer but didn't touch her yet. She looked so small in that moment, so stripped. They waited until court was over, she whispered. Until I stood in town. Yes, they wanted to remind me. Her voice cracked fully this time, not controlled, not steady. They wanted to erase me. Silas stepped behind her, wrapped his arms around her gently. She stiffened for half a second, then she collapsed into him, her body shaking, years of strength unraveling all at once. I built that place from nothing, she sobbed softly. I kept her alive there. And you still did, he said fiercely. She turned in his arms, tears streaking ash across her face. It was ours. It was a hiding place, he said quietly, and now it's gone, she nodded weakly. He cupped her face gently. Good, she stared at him stunned. What? They burned a memory, he said. Not your future. The words hung heavy. She searched his face, found no pity, only anger, only resolve. This was meant to scare us, he continued. To push you back into silence. Margaret inhaled shakily. And did it? She looked back at the flames, watched the roof collapse inward, then slowly she straightened. No, her voice was raw but steady. Silas nodded once. Then they failed. They stayed until the fire died down, until the cabin was nothing but blackened ribs against the hillside. When they turned to leave, Margaret didn't look back. This time she didn't need to. Because whoever set that fire had meant it as a warning. But instead, they had removed the last place Margaret could ever run to, and people who have nothing left to lose stop running entirely. They rode back in silence. Not the fragile kind, not the uncertain kind. This silence had teeth. Claire was waiting on the porch when they returned, Daniel standing just behind her. The moment she saw her mother's face, she knew. It's gone, Claire whispered. Margaret knelt in front of her daughter and pulled her close. Yes, Claire didn't cry, not at first. She just pressed her face into Margaret's shoulder and breathed in deeply. It smelled like sage, she murmured softly. I liked that. Margaret closed her eyes tightly. I know, Daniel stepped forward slowly. I saw Pike riding east earlier, he said quietly. And Crowell, Silas's jaw hardened. Margaret stood. They want us afraid, Daniel nodded grimly. Town's buzzing already. Some are saying it was an accident. Silas let out a sharp breath that wasn't laughter. Convenient. Daniel looked between them. You want to press charges? Margaret went very still. Press charges. Against who? Against the town. Silas answered first. We don't have proof. We have motive, Margaret said quietly. Daniel nodded. Be careful. Pride makes men reckless. When Daniel left, the ranch felt different. The walls closer, the air heavier. Claire sat at the kitchen table tracing patterns into the wood grain with her finger. Are they going to burn this house too? She asked softly. Silas stepped forward immediately. No, Margaret crouched beside her. Why not? Because this one isn't hidden, Silas replied. Claire looked between them. So we stay. Margaret held her daughter's face gently in both hands. We stay, Claire nodded slowly. Okay, that simple, that brave. After Claire went upstairs, Margaret remained at the table long after the lamps were lit. Silas poured 2 cups of coffee and placed one near her. She didn't drink it. They took the last place that belonged only to us, she said finally. He leaned back against the counter. They took wood and walls. They took years. They didn't take you, she looked up at him. Anger shimmered behind her eyes now, not fear. They think fire makes me smaller, she said quietly. They miscalculated, silence stretched. The fire crackled in the hearth. You knew this would happen, she continued softly, when you married me. Yes, and you didn't hesitate. No, she studied him carefully. You're angry. Yes, not afraid, he considered that. Angry enough to forget fear, she stood slowly, walked toward him close enough that the space between them disappeared. If you go looking for revenge, she warned gently, you hand them exactly what they want. He met her eyes. I won't burn anything. Good. She reached up and brushed ash from his sleeve. You can't protect me by becoming the monster they claim I am. He swallowed, the truth of that cut deep. She rested her forehead briefly against his chest. Just for a second, we win by staying, she whispered. He wrapped his arms around her carefully. Then we stay. Outside, wind swept across the fields, strong, unrelenting. Upstairs, Claire slept again without shoes beside her bed. And somewhere in Briar Hollow, Deputy Pike stared at the empty remains of the burned cabin. Not satisfied, because fire was supposed to send a message, but instead it had drawn a line. And lines, once crossed, change everything. The next morning, Silas rode into town alone. Not in anger, not in secrecy, in daylight, in full view, people noticed. They always did. Whispers followed him down Main Street like dust behind a wagon wheel. He tied his horse outside the sheriff's office and walked in without knocking. Deputy Harold Pike looked up from his desk. For a brief second, something like surprise flickered across his face. Then it was gone. Walker, Pike, Silas removed his hat slowly and set it on the desk. Cabin burned. Pike leaned back in his chair. That's so, 3 sets of boot prints. That's so, Silas held his gaze. You investigate fires when there's proof of arson. There is. Witnesses, no. Names, no. Pike folded his hands calmly. Then you have smoke and suspicion. The word hung in the air like poison. Silas leaned forward slightly. You buried a statement 4 years ago. Pike's jaw tightened. Careful. No, Silas replied evenly. You be careful. Silence thickened. Men outside the office slowed their steps, listening. You think this town wants trouble? Pike asked quietly. You think I do? You brought it. Silas's eyes hardened. No, this town created it. Pike stood slowly. You married scandal. I married truth. Pike's expression shifted just slightly. You're not going to scare me, Walker. I'm not trying to. The words were calm, controlled, far more dangerous than shouting. Silas picked up his hat. If another fence post burns, he said quietly, I won't come to you first. Pike's hand hovered near his belt. Is that a threat? It's a promise. Silas turned and walked out. Main Street felt heavier now. Eyes followed him. Some hostile, some thoughtful. Across the street, Virginia Prescott stood outside the Mercantile again, always watching, always calculating. You're escalating, she said smoothly as he passed. No, he replied without stopping. You are, she tilted her head slightly. You think you've won something, I think you lost. Her lips curved faintly. Fire is a warning, Mr. Walker, it can become something much worse. Silas stopped, turned slowly. You threatened my wife in court, now her cabin burns, that's coincidence. Virginia's expression did not change. You're implying something dangerous. You're implying something cowardly. The air around them sharpened, people slowed to listen. Virginia's voice dropped lower. You've made yourself very visible. Good, she studied him carefully. You won't be able to protect them forever. Silas stepped closer. Watch me. For the first time, her composure flickered. Only a fraction, but enough. He mounted his horse and rode back to the ranch without looking behind him. When he arrived, Margaret was in the garden, pulling weeds with deliberate focus. She looked up immediately. You went to town, yes, and they won't admit anything. Of course not, he dismounted slowly. I told Pike I won't come politely next time. Her hand stilled. Silas, I didn't threaten. She rose and walked toward him. You can't let them turn you into what they say you are. I won't, but you're angry. Yes, she stepped close enough that her hand rested lightly against his chest. I need you steady, she said softly. Not furious, he exhaled slowly. I am steady. She searched his face, then nodded once. Good, Claire ran toward them from the porch. I planted seeds, she announced proudly. Margaret smiled faintly. Silas crouched down. What kind? Sunflowers. He looked up at Margaret. She didn't miss the symbolism, something that grew tall, bright, unapologetic. Claire grabbed both their hands and pulled them toward the small patch of earth. Silas and Margaret stood side by side, looking down at freshly planted seeds. Margaret squeezed his hand lightly. "They think fire ends things," she murmured. Silas squeezed back. "But it only clears space." The wind shifted across the fields, carrying ash from the past, and the promise of something new rising, whether the town liked it or not. The town did not quiet, but it shifted. That was the strange part. Silas noticed it first at the feed store. Men who once turned their backs now nodded stiffly, not friendly, not warm, but no longer openly hostile. Daniel Porter stood beside him at the grain barrels. "They're divided," Daniel muttered under his breath. "Some think the fire went too far." Silas didn't look up. "Too far, burning a woman's old cabin after she wins in court. Doesn't sit right." Silas measured the feed carefully. "Who lit it?" Daniel hesitated. "I don't have proof." "Names." Daniel glanced around before lowering his voice. "Crowell was seen riding east, Pike 2. Silas's hand stilled. "That's not proof," Daniel added quickly. "No, but it was something." Across town, Margaret felt the shift too. Pearl Whitmore visited the ranch openly now. She arrived with a basket of preserves and an apology she'd been carrying for 4 years. "I should have spoken sooner," Pearl said, voice trembling. Margaret nodded gently. "You're speaking now." Claire sat beside them at the table, listening carefully. "You were brave," Pearl told her softly. Claire looked confused. "I just told the truth." Margaret's eyes filled quietly. That was bravery. Outside, more wagons began passing the ranch road, slower, watching, but not stopping, not yet. That afternoon, a group of women from town appeared unexpectedly at the gate. Margaret froze at the sight. Silas stepped forward instinctively. The women did not look hostile, they looked uncertain. Nettie Dawson stood at the front. "You helped my brother's fever," she said quietly. "I wanted to thank you." Margaret swallowed. "You're welcome." Another woman stepped forward hesitantly. "My husband says the fire was wrong." Margaret didn't respond. She didn't need their husband's opinions, but something was changing. The women didn't stay long. They didn't apologize directly, but they came, and that mattered. That night, as Silas and Margaret sat on the porch, Claire chased fireflies across the yard. "You see it?" Silas asked quietly. "Yes. They're turning. Some are," she corrected gently. He studied her profile in the fading light. "You could have left," he said, "after the fire." "And go where?" He didn't answer. She leaned back against the porch rail. "I'm done running." The words carried weight, 4 years of it, finished. Claire ran back toward them, laughing. "Mama, they glow." Margaret smiled fully this time. "They do." Silas watched both of them carefully. Something inside him had shifted too. He wasn't fighting just for protection anymore. He was fighting for belonging, for permanence, for something that felt like home. But across town, Virginia Prescott was not watching the shift with concern. She was watching it with calculation. Division in a town could be turned, could be twisted, and pride does not accept public loss quietly. As night settled over Briar Hollow, the ranch stood steady, lights warm in the windows, laughter soft in the yard, but somewhere beyond the tree line another plan was forming. Because when whispers change, those who thrive on control grow desperate. It happened past midnight. Silas woke first, not to sound, to instinct. The kind that tightens your chest before your mind understands why. Then came the horses. Multiple, not passing, stopping. He was already out of bed when the first rock shattered against the front window. Glass exploded inward. Claire screamed upstairs. Margaret bolted upright. "Stay with her," Silas ordered, already reaching for his rifle. Another rock hit, then another. Shouting followed. "Murderer, go back to the woods." Silas stepped onto the porch. 5 riders, faces shadowed, torches in hand. Firelight flickering against the barn walls. "Go home," he shouted. Laughter answered. One rider hurled a bottle toward the porch. It shattered, flames licking up the railing. Margaret appeared beside him before he could stop her. "I told you to stay inside." "They're not taking this too," she snapped. Silas fired once into the air. The shot cracked through the night. Horses reared. The laughter faltered. "Last warning," he roared. For a split second, the riders hesitated. Then one voice cut through clearly. "You think marriage makes her clean?" The tone was familiar. Crowell. Silas aimed lower this time, not at a man, at the ground near a horse's hooves. The dirt exploded upward. The horse spooked violently. Its rider nearly fell. Enough, Silas barked. Margaret grabbed the bucket by the porch and doused the flames, licking the wood. The riders cursed. Another shot rang out from their side. It struck the barn door. Claire screamed again from inside. Something inside Silas went cold, not hot, cold, precise. You cross that fence, he said evenly, rifle steady, and you don't ride back. The calm in his voice did more than anger ever could. Silence stretched, the torches flickered. Then one by one, the riders backed their horses away, not defeated, but shaken. Crowell lingered a second longer. This isn't over, he spat. It never was, Silas replied. The riders turned and vanished into the dark. Silas didn't lower the rifle until the sound of hooves faded completely. Margaret rushed inside. Claire was trembling under the blankets, tears streaking her face. They came, she whispered. Margaret gathered her clothes. Yes, are they coming back? Silas stepped into the doorway. No, his voice was certain, unyielding. Claire clung to her mother. Margaret looked up at Silas. They escalated. Yes, and you escalated back. Yes, fear flickered between them. Not of each other, of what came next. They'll call you violent now, she said quietly. I didn't shoot a man. No, she agreed softly. You defended your home. Downstairs, the broken window let cold air pour in. Silas moved to board it up immediately. Margaret followed. Together they worked in silence, hammering wood into place, securing what had been broken. Claire watched from the stairs, wide-eyed, brave. When the boards were set and the fire fully out, Silas set the rifle against the wall. Margaret stepped close. You scared them, she said quietly. I meant to, she searched his face. You didn't lose yourself. No, she rested her hand against his chest. You stayed steady. He covered her hand with his. They crossed the line. So did we, she replied gently. Outside, the night returned to stillness. But it wasn't peace, it was tension waiting, because torches thrown in darkness have a way of spreading, and this time the town had seen who lit them and who stood firm in the flames. The town woke to broken glass and rumors. But this time the rumors didn't move in only one direction. Daniel Porter was at the ranch before sunrise. He didn't knock. He stepped through the open gate and stopped cold when he saw the boarded window. They came, he said quietly. Silas nodded once. How many? 5. Daniel's jaw tightened. Crowell, yes, Daniel cursed under his breath. They shot at the barn, Silas added. Daniel went still. That crossed into something different. Inside, Margaret brewed coffee with steady hands, too steady. Claire sat at the table wrapped in a blanket, trying to act unaffected, but her eyes were red. Daniel removed his hat when he entered. I'm sorry, he said sincerely. Margaret met his gaze. You didn't throw the torches. No, but I didn't stop them either. Silence, that mattered. By mid-morning, word had spread, and something unexpected happened. Sheriff Cole arrived, not Pike. The actual territorial sheriff, older, wider shoulders, calm eyes. He dismounted slowly and surveyed the damage. You Walker, he asked. Yes, and you're Mrs. Walker now, Margaret nodded. He studied the boards on the window. Reports reached my office before dawn, he said. About riders, fire. Silas didn't soften his tone. They tried. Sheriff Cole glanced toward the barn door with the bullet hole. That a warning shot, defense. The sheriff nodded once. Any of them cross your fence? No, good. He turned slowly, scanning the fields. You recognize anyone? Silas held his gaze. Yes, names, Crowell and likely Pike. Margaret inhaled sharply. That was no small accusation. The sheriff didn't flinch. I'll handle Pike, he said evenly. Silence fell heavy. Daniel shifted beside the porch. You saw something? The sheriff asked him. Daniel nodded. Crowell was drinking loud at the saloon last night. Talking about cleansing. The word sounded uglier in daylight. Sheriff Cole's jaw hardened. Cleansing what? Daniel didn't answer. He didn't need to. The sheriff removed his gloves slowly. I won't have vigilante nonsense in my territory, he said. I don't care how loud the whispers get. Margaret stepped forward. You mean that? I do. 4 years ago, she said quietly. No one meant it. The sheriff met her eyes. I'm not Pike, that was true. By noon, Crowell was in custody. The sight of him being led down Main Street in irons changed something, not entirely, but enough. Virginia Prescott watched from the mercantile porch. Fury controlled behind polite posture. Her grip was slipping, not completely, but visibly. Back at the ranch, Claire sat on the porch steps holding a sunflower seed packet. They didn't burn this house, she said softly. No, Silas replied, they won't. Margaret watched the road. People saw last night, she murmured. They can't pretend it didn't happen. Silas leaned against the railing. They chose a side, she glanced at him. And you, I chose it the day she ran barefoot to my fence. Claire smiled faintly at that. Margaret stepped closer to him. You didn't become what they wanted. No, she rested her head briefly against his shoulder. They tried to scare us, he nodded. And she looked up at him steady. I'm not scared anymore. The words surprised even her, but they were true. The line had been crossed, and instead of retreat, they had stood. Across town, Sheriff Cole entered Pike's office without knocking. And when he walked out, Pike no longer wore a badge. Because sometimes, it only takes one night of fire for a town to see clearly who the real threat has been all along. Deputy Harold Pike did not go quietly. When Sheriff Cole removed the badge from his chest in front of 3 witnesses, Pike's face drained first of color, then of restraint. You're making a mistake, Pike said tightly. No, Sheriff Cole replied, you did. The badge hit the desk with a dull, final sound. Outside, the rumor spread faster than fire ever had. By afternoon, half of Briar Hollow knew. The other half pretended not to. Virginia Prescott moved carefully through the town square, expression composed, voice measured. A misunderstanding, she told anyone listening, emotions running high, but her eyes betrayed calculation, damage control. At the ranch, Silas heard the news from Daniel Porter before sunset. They stripped him, Daniel said quietly. Silas nodded once. Margaret stood still beside the stove. They won't forgive us for this, she murmured. We didn't do it, Silas replied. No, she agreed softly, but we exposed it. Claire looked up from her book. Does that mean they'll stop being mean? Silence fell. Daniel answered honestly. Some will, and some, she asked. Won't? Claire considered that, then nodded like she had expected it. That evening, something else unexpected happened. 3 men approached the ranch on foot, not armed, not shouting, hands visible. Silas stepped outside immediately. Margaret followed. The men stopped short of the fence. One cleared his throat. We were there, he admitted. Last night, Silas's jaw tightened, but we didn't throw anything, the man rushed to add. We just rode. Margaret's eyes sharpened. And that makes it better, the man swallowed. No, ma'am, silence. The second man stepped forward slightly. We were wrong. The words sounded unfamiliar in the open air. Silas studied them carefully. Why come now? Because Crowell's in a cell, the first man replied, and Pike's gone, and we don't want this town turning into something worse. Margaret crossed her arms slowly. It already did, she said quietly. The third man nodded. That's why we're here. It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't friendship, but it was accountability, and that shifted the ground beneath everything. When the men left, Silas turned to Margaret. They're scared. Yes, she agreed. But not of us. That night, as Claire slept deeply upstairs, Margaret and Silas stood on the porch watching the sky darken. The air felt different again, less sharp, less waiting. You could leave, she said quietly. Sell the ranch. Start somewhere clean, he looked at her. Would you? She considered that. No. Then neither will I. A long pause. The wind moved gently through the fields. Margaret reached for his hand, not out of fear, out of choice. They tried to erase me, she said softly. And I'm still here, he smiled faintly. Good. Across town, Sheriff Cole gathered statements. Witnesses spoke now who had been silent before, not all but enough. And Virginia Prescott realized something dangerous. The story she had controlled for 4 years was slipping beyond her reach, because truth, once spoken aloud, doesn't shrink back into whispers. And Briar Hollow was learning that silence had cost it too much already. The hearing for Crowell lasted less than an hour. Arson, incitement, attempted violence. He denied everything, blamed drink, blamed anger. Blamed protecting the town. But witnesses had finally decided to speak. Men who once rode in silence admitted they saw him throw the bottle. One admitted he heard Pike encourage it. Crowell left in irons, not as loud as before. Not as certain. Virginia Prescott did not attend. That, more than anything, told Margaret the tide had shifted. Back at the ranch, life continued, not dramatically, not triumphantly, but steadily. Claire planted the sunflower seeds along the fence line. Margaret rebuilt her herb garden from scratch, stronger soil, better placement. Silas repaired the barn door without a word about the bullet hole. They did not erase what happened. They worked around it. One afternoon, Pearl Whitmore brought a small wooden box. Inside were 3 journals, saved from the old cabin months ago when Margaret had once lent them for safe keeping and forgotten. I thought you might want these, Pearl said gently. Margaret's hands shook as she opened the box. Her handwriting stared back at her from the pages. Memories, recipes, observations, proof of her own voice surviving. She let out a breath that sounded almost like laughter. They didn't burn everything, she whispered. Silas watched her carefully. No, he agreed, they didn't. That evening, as the sun dipped low, Claire ran to the fence. One sprouted, she shouted. A tiny green shoot pushed through the soil, fragile, uncertain, alive. Margaret walked out beside her daughter, knelt slowly, touched the earth. Silas stood behind them. For a long moment, none of them spoke. Then Claire looked up. Do you think they'll grow tall? Yes, Margaret said softly. Silas nodded. They're stubborn, Claire grinned. Like Mama, Margaret laughed quietly, for real this time, no restraint, no fear. The sound carried across the fields, across the same land that once held a hidden cabin, across the same land where fire tried to erase a life, but what remained was stronger, not untouched, not unscarred, but rooted. That night, as Margaret and Silas sat side by side on the porch, the air felt settled, not because the town was perfect, not because every whisper had stopped, but because they no longer needed it to. You were right, Margaret said quietly. About what? They burned a memory, not my future. He glanced at her, and she slipped her hand into his, and I'm done letting them decide either. Upstairs, Claire slept deeply. No shoes by her bed, no bag packed, just soft breathing. And outside, a row of tiny green shoots reached upward, unapologetic, toward light, because fire clears ground, but it does not stop growth. And Briar Hollow had learned the hardest thing to destroy is a family that refuses to disappear. Autumn settled in slowly, not with drama, with patience. The ranch changed in small ways first. Claire's sunflowers rose taller than the fence posts, bright faces turning toward the sun as if they had never known shadow. She measured them daily, announcing each inch gained like a victory. Margaret's garden flourished too. Sage, yarrow, chamomile, rows of green that smelled like resilience. Neighbors began stopping by openly now, not whispering at the gate but knocking on the door. Some came for medicine, some came for apologies. Margaret offered the first freely. The second carefully. Silas watched it all with quiet pride. He didn't hover, didn't claim credit. He simply made sure the porch light stayed lit at night. One evening, as Margaret kneaded dough at the kitchen table, he paused in the doorway. You hum now, he said softly. She froze for a second, then continued kneading. I always did. No, he replied gently. Not always, she smiled faintly but didn't deny it. Claire burst through the door with dirt on her knees and excitement in her voice. Daniel says they're fixing the school roof, she exclaimed. He says I can start lessons in winter. Margaret's hand stilled. Do you want to? She asked carefully. Claire thought about it. Yes, but I don't want to stop learning with you. You won't, Margaret assured her. Silas leaned against the wall. Guess we'll need extra paper then, Claire grinned at him. Papa, she said casually. The word no longer startled the room, it belonged there now. Later that night, when Claire slept and the house quieted, Margaret stood at the bedroom window. Silas joined her. Still waiting for the other shoe to drop, he asked quietly. A little, he nodded. So am I, she turned toward him. But it hasn't. No, the town had not grown perfect. Virginia Prescott still walked Main Street with stiff dignity, though her influence had thinned. Some doors remained closed, some eyes still judged. But no one rode with torches anymore, and Sheriff Cole made that very clear. Margaret reached for Silas's hand. You didn't save me, she said softly. He blinked. No, no, you stood with me, he swallowed. That's different. Yes, she replied. It's everything. Silence settled between them, not tense, not fragile, alive. I loved Samuel, she added quietly. I know, I never thought I could. She stopped herself. Silas didn't rush her. Didn't fill the space. After a long moment, she finished. I never thought I could feel safe again. He stepped closer. You don't have to rush anything, she smiled softly. I'm not rushing. Then she kissed him, not careful, not tentative. Certain downstairs, the house creaked gently in the cooling night air. Not hollow, not echoing, breathing, because some homes are built from wood and nails, and some are built from fire survived. And Briar Hollow was learning. The difference between fear and strength is often just who refuses to leave. Winter arrived without asking permission. Frost crept across the fence posts. The sunflowers bowed and withered, but their seeds remained strong and waiting beneath the soil. Claire started school in a wool coat 2 sizes too big, walking into town with her chin lifted high. Some children stared, some whispered, but one little girl moved over on the bench and made space. That was enough. Margaret watched from the schoolhouse steps the first morning, fingers laced tightly in front of her. Silas stood beside her, silent but solid. "She'll be all right," he said quietly. "I know," Margaret replied, and she did, because Claire had never been fragile, only tested. The town adjusted slowly, not out of guilt. Out of realization. Crowell remained jailed through winter. Pike left Briar Hollow entirely. Virginia Prescott's voice grew quieter, though not gone. She no longer commanded, she observed. Sometimes that was worse, but it was different. At the ranch, life settled into rhythm. Margaret expanded her herb garden into a proper apothecary shelf in the kitchen. People now came openly for remedies. They paid fairly. They said thank you. They stayed for coffee. Silas no longer ate standing up. He no longer counted days of silence. One evening, snow fell heavy and clean. Claire rushed outside with mittened hands, laughing as flakes caught in her hair. "Papa," she shouted. "It's like the sky forgot to be mad." Silas laughed, deep and warm. Margaret stood in the doorway watching them, watching the man who once lived in silence throw snow into the air like a boy. Watching her daughter run without looking over her shoulder, her breath caught not from fear, from gratitude. Silas returned to the porch and brushed snow from his coat. "You all right?" he asked gently. She nodded. "Yes." A long pause. "Sometimes I wait for it to disappear," she admitted softly. "All of it." He stepped close. "It won't." "How do you know?" "Because we're not hiding anymore." Snow drifted down between them. She reached up and cupped his face. "I was wrong once," she said quietly. "About what?" "About kindness," he smiled faintly. "You still think it's dangerous?" "Yes," she replied honestly. He waited. "But it's also stronger than fear." Inside, Claire burst through the door, cheeks flushed. "Mama, Papa, the snow's covering everything." Margaret smiled. "Good." Claire tilted her head. "Why good?" "Because sometimes," Margaret said softly, glancing at Silas, "fresh ground needs covering before it grows again." Claire considered that, then nodded as if it made perfect sense. That night the three of them sat by the fire. Snow fell steady outside. No torches, no riders, no shattered glass, just warmth. Margaret leaned against Silas. Claire dozed with her head in Margaret's lap. The house breathed around them. Alive, settled, chosen. And far beyond the ranch fence, Briar Hollow glowed softly under winter's quiet blanket. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't spotless. But it had learned something. Fire can burn a cabin. Whispers can wound. Pride can poison. But a family that stands in daylight, that refuses to disappear, becomes something harder to destroy than wood or reputation. Because what remained was not a hiding place, it was a home, and this time the light stayed.